Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Ordinary Council meeting on Tuesday the 3rd of March 2020. East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcasting to enhance the accessibility of its meetings to the broader East Gippsland community. These recordings are also archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate times during the meeting, any members of the gallery who are addressing council will have their imaged comments or submissions recorded. No other person has the right to record council meetings unless approval has been granted by the chair. Please ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are turned off and in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. Councillors, I would like to remind you to make sure that your microphone is turned on when you are addressing the gallery. Members of the public wishing to speak, we will ensure that the microphone is turned on for you. On behalf of Council, I would like to acknowledge the Kurnai people, the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, and pay our respects to their elders both past and present. Mr CEO, we have apologies.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I don't have any apologies. However, Councillor O'Connell is not here tonight, but has in item 1.6 will cover off on her absence.
That would be an apology.
Thank you.
Happy to take it as an apology, Mr Mayor.
I think we could put that into the minutes as an apology for tonight's meeting. Thank you. Any declarations of conflict of interest?
None have been received, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. So, councillors, could we have a confirmation of the minutes of our last ordinary meeting? Moved by Councillor Roteno and seconded by Councillor Toohey. Thank you. All those in favour? Unanimous.
Mr Mayor, sorry, I abstained. I wasn't at the special council meeting. I didn't vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see that. Could we please have that as 8 and 1 abstain? Yes. So, we'll get it. Our next Ordinary Council meeting will be on the 17th of March 2020 to be held at the Can River Hall and Recreation Reserve 24 Tambourne Road, Can River, commencing at 1 p.m. As the CEO has indicated, item 1.6, requests for leave of absence. Councillor Natalie O'Connell has requested leave of absence in accordance with Local Law Number 1, Section L 3.5 for the period 1 March to 31 March 2020. So the recommendation is that Councillor O'Connell be granted leave of absence for that period 1 March to 31 March 2020.
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Ellis moves it and Councillor Buckley seconds it. So all those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you. So 1.7, requests to speak about your community project. Do we have any requests?
There are no requests tonight, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. 1.8, public question time. Do we have any questions?
There are no questions tonight, Mr Mayor.
1.9, a record of assemblies of councillors. It's Councillor Reeves has moved it and Councillor Pelt seconded. All those in favour? Also unanimous. So the recommendation is that Council notes the record of assemblies of councils that occurred during the period 25 January to 24 February 2020, together with 2 records not previously presented from the 10th of December to the 17th of December 2019. Okay. Any petitions? Please.
There are no petitions, Mr Mayor.
Notices of motion and/or of rescission?
None have been received, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. And deferred business?
Likewise, there is no deferred business tonight.
All right, item 4 then is councillor and delegate reports. Councillor Toohey, would you like to be first? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have submitted my report and there's nothing I wish to speak on this month. Thank you.
Councillor Rotino.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If I can, with your indulgence, just talk about one item out of my report, and that is the Lee Hobbs exhibition at the East Gippsland Art Gallery. You know, when someone from East Gippsland or Bairnsdale returns home and you have a famous person like Lee Hobbs, who did go to school here, have an art exhibition, and Mr Chicken comes to Bairnsdale. So I encourage you all to go and have a look at the exhibition. Some of you may have borrowed your kids' books to read, but yeah, I was extremely proud to represent you, Mr Mayor, and humbled to officiate and declare the Lee Hobbs exhibition officially open. Lee's father, Jack, was one of the teachers at the Bairnsdale Tech School from 1961 to 1966. Jack's age 96 at the moment, but Lee was a student at Bairnsdale Primary School 754 and fondly remembers his grade 3 teacher, Miss Corker, who was also a local identity around Bairnsdale and happened to play the organ at St Mary's Church every Sunday. Lee went to primary school at 754 but lived in Francis Street, and part of his exhibition he actually signed one of his paintings and handed it over to the school for them to have at their school on display. His books are known all around the world. They bring a lot of people out to galleries, and I urge people to take their families to this exhibition. It's timely to have such an exhibition in our area, which will delight children of all ages, including many parents, many of whom have had a difficult time during the summer. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Reeves, would you like to do your report?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Councillor Rotino. Womaninji, good evening and welcome, everyone. Once again, for me, it's hard to ignore the elephant in the room of the bushfires and our recovery. Firstly, I want to quote from Grace Brennan, the 2020 Australia Day address speaker, founder of the hashtag Buy From The Bush social media campaign to support rural communities facing drought. Grace said, "Country towns have been built on what I would call a foundation of doers. On any given day, an Australian farmer is an amateur scientist, a vet, a builder or a mechanic. They often manage multi-million-dollar assets. They might trade commodities before lunch and genetically test their sheep flock after lunch." Sounds like you, Mayor. Our local bus driver, a mother of 3, is also an aged care worker and a firefighter. Farmers' wives might feed their stock or do an irrigation run in the morning and then go to work as a teacher, fashion designer, agronomist, researcher, online business owner or lawyer. Councillors, we've seen this when reflecting on the recent events in our shire. In these events, the local school became the fire accommodation provider, an ADF operational base at the footy ground. The sausage maker became the fire captain, the welder, the midnight fire truck driver, the baker fed hundreds of strike team members. The local timber haulage and harvester and machine operators became the forest fire direct response operators. The local rangers and Vic Forest managers became the incident controllers. Police controlled roadblocks and they controlled refugees. CFA became the source of reassurance and control in an out-of-control situation. There's a perception from urban Australia that seems that country people are quiet and retiring. Some are. But those I saw activated by the fires were far from retiring. The communities of East Gippsland were activated and animated, and for this, we thank you. Secondly, councillors, I saw a momentous upwelling in community spirit with the departure of the soldiers from the Republic of Fiji in Orbost, and I was happy to represent our shire there. That evening in Orbost was hugely touching, councillors. Auntie Sue Martin and her Indigenous dancers welcomed us to country. Several hundred community members were sung to by the soldiers. Their beautiful, resonant and strong voices flowed through the crowd. lulled us and soothed us, carried us away. No one was unmoved. We were all touched by that event. It seems to me no one was quiet that night. We were all moved, and it was a real turning point. Now we were again on our own. All those active people in their normal roles were returning to their usual lives, and so were our brothers from Fiji. This disaster event has changed our community, and our international connection and with help from around the world has reinforced that this was a global disaster. I continue to wish everyone well in the continued challenging times ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves, and well spoken, thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mine's quite brief. There's a stream of vehicles going into Brunambra this morning, going to the start of the March sales. And it looked like a very good event it was going to be, but I don't know how well it went, so I can't report on that. But anyway, things are looking a lot better up our way than they were a few weeks ago. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll submit my written report. Just mention one or two quick matters that I can report to council. One was last week representing East Gippsland at the launch of a sister city style of relationship between the Port Melbourne Business and Tourist Association and the Lakes Entrance BTA, an event hosted by Port Phillip City Council and Mayor Bernardine Voss. The launch was well attended, with a series of actions being announced in the coming months to come to not only raise funds for a joint project in Lakes Entrance, but to encourage visitation by Port Melbourne and district residents to Lakes Entrance and East Gippsland as a whole. I should like to make special thanks to the driving force behind this initiative, from the Port Melbourne Business and Tourist Association, Mr Paul Littleman. And as an aside, for those interested in such things, Mayor Voss, although possessing a strong East Gippsland surname in the name Voss, as you'd well remember, Mr Mayor, she is the granddaughter of a Lakes Entrance resident, Ernie Hugg, and still holds ties to East Gippsland. So that's a positive matter that came out. I also hosted and welcomed on your behalf, the Eastern Region Lionesses to Lakes Entrance for their breakaway weekend and conference. This wonderful community group, like other community groups in the region, have provided support and sustenance to our bushfire affected people and other members of the community over the past 12 months. The amount of money that they have raised for those in need is commendable, and I commend this group amongst all volunteers to council. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mayor. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to put something together, although I would like to refer to Councillor Rotino's report. He failed to mention Lee Hobbs's most famous artwork, which is the mural at George's Burgers. So that's a real highlight. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you for reminding us, because I too have seen that mural many times. Councillor Peltz.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Along with the community engagements, I've managed to get in my portfolio stuff, which was rural councils for our region. That was held mid-February, about the 18th, and then the following week was the seats meeting. The rural councils, one of the things that came out of there was that 60% of the economic development funding should go to the fire affected. It was agreed that they would support that 60% of the funding should go to fire affected towns and regions. And then the other thing that was taken from there was the fact that there was some things around the council induction program that will be initiated later this year in regards to the new council election. So there was some stuff there that was relevant, but it wasn't so relevant to now all this space. So the seats thing was good. It was the 16 councils southeast of Wollongong to Dandenong, basically, and I chair that meeting. We're all about roads and safety and structure for communities and transport issues. One great thing or four great things that came out of there were four motions that were in support. They were relevant to the councils over the border that have been affected by the fires as well. Was Bega and Shoalhaven and the Snowy Monaro one. And basically it was great to be able to sit amongst your peers and talk about the similar issues that we all had and how they were addressing theirs. The four motions that were raised were in regards to the bushfire bridge replacement program, mobile telephonics and major road structures. The Princess Highway upgrade needs more formulation, and the road and power disruptions. So we felt these were relevant to all our communities in regards to our region. We certainly did suffer 7 weeks of the Princess Highway being closed and some of our communities being isolated completely and not being accessible. So with regards to that, basically the background of these motions were the fact that they wanted to, 18 months ago we were campaigning to get the Princess Highway put back on the roads of national importance, and we felt that the fires in our region had really highlighted the fact that we were singing from the right page, and nothing had come from this, and it was probably ignored at the time, but looking back, it is exactly what we were saying happened, and our community was unfortunately the area that suffered the most from it. With that said, there was great support in campaigning the federal members, and we will be going through the motion of ringing them up and having a bit of a one-on-one face chat with them. So Seats makes an urgent request to the Australian Government in conjunction with the various state government bodies with their road and infrastructure agencies to offer a special bushfire bridge replacement program to enable resilience to be built into regional road networks, and thereby stimulating additional work in the fire-affected regions that will provide increased safety and confidence to local government and their communities into the future. We also wanted to back that up with a committed funding source that would guarantee the maintenance and the standard to be kept. With that motion, we felt that that was important to make sure that there was funding put aside for to keep this infrastructure relevant and safe, that couldn't be reallocated to other initiatives, basically. The second one was Seats strongly request that the Australian Government ensure that within 5 years all national and state highways achieve a 95% mobile telephone reception coverage, and that the rollout commence on the Monaro Highway and the Princess Highway between Sydney and Melbourne. We felt that was important with regards to the safety issues for our communities. A lot of our areas lost telephone coverage and couldn't call out, and we couldn't call in, and we had no idea what had happened to them in that space of time. The third one was seeking strong requests that the Government of New South Wales and Victoria combine with the Australian Government to roll out a matter of urgency those elements of improvements within the local government areas of Shoalhaven, Eurobodalla, Bega Valley and East Gippsland that can be planned, designed and delivered onto the next 5 years to be packaged up in a Princess Highway resilience program to develop a highway network that will provide safe connectivity for the communities in this part of Australia in all weather and in all environmental conditions. And that speaks for itself, basically. And the last one, if I may be so bold, Mr Mayor, Seats strongly urges that the various road, electricity suppliers and telecommunication agencies provide easement buffers around all assets to provide continuity of available supplies to their assets in our regions and in all weather and environmental conditions. state agencies should review and amend policies that impinge on the outcome being achieved. So we feel that there's a lot of tape that needs to be addressed there, but we felt it's not unreasonable to ask, considering what we've faced in the 2-month period. And I think, you know, they're really great motions that came from that meeting last week that we'll march forward with. So making sure and endeavouring that our community is heard and that their requirements are addressed. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. As most people would expect, there's been many things happen in the month for myself, so I'll just highlight a couple of them. Early in February, the CEO and myself travelled up to Omeo, where the Fijian Armed Forces were supporting that area through the recovery and clearance of debris on that after the fires, and it was great to see that the people of Omeo and district had totally embraced these great people, great men and women, and how they had embraced the community. The spirits were really great up there. They were basically getting ready to depart, and they were busily in Livingston Park. They were busily digging a pit in the ground and filling it with hot rocks to do similar to the Maoris, but they call theirs a mumu. So cooking lunch. Unfortunately, we couldn't stay for lunch because we needed to get somewhere else as well during the day. But what we'd gone up there was to present them with the freedom of entry to Omeo, which the Armed Forces considered that to be quite a significant event, and so it was quite a good ceremony where we exchanged documents, but they presented council with a dingo paw medallion, and this was the Australian Defence Force, and it was quite a rare thing to be presented with it. They'd only presented only a handful of those in their time as a part of the Australian Army. They called it freedom of entry, but when we got into one of those bush masters, I would have called it rite of passage, because we went for a drive around Omeo and we got freedom. Nobody got in our road. We had a great drive up the main street, but they were so enthusiastic that we'd gone to that trouble and gone up there to meet them, and they were just taking happy snaps and having a really great time. And somebody had found a football, and at times it was thrown from one group to the next like a rugby pass, and the guys at the other end kicked it back as a drop punt like Aussie rules. So there was a bit of a mixture of cultures up there. But on that same day was the Canai Creek races, and I'd sort of made a pledge to visit there. Not that I'm a racing person, but just to go to that community to appreciate the work they had done after such a devastating fire only weeks before, to get that race meeting up and running. And they still had the half-burnt horseshoe at the finish post. They had not replaced that, and I clearly remember that from an earlier visit, that was symbolic. But they had a massive turnout and had a really good day. So tip my hat to the residents, the people of Buchan, for putting on such a great event. We also, later on in the month, Senator David Van, Victorian Senator, he brought a group of Consul Generals to Lakes Entrance for a roundtable discussion, which was amazing. They were from many countries around the world, and some of them quite influential countries. There was United States, there was Japan, there was China, India, the Philippines, Malaysia. It was quite an impressive group. What I can say is that they could not get over the view out over the lakes and Lakes Entrance and the ocean from Palmers Road. They all sat facing the window, and we had a really good day, meaningful discussions, and from that meeting watch this space. We could see some more visits later on in the year for some symbolic events, so bringing that to our region. And just last week, this was a trip, my first trip up to Canberra for a meeting of the joint, the Canberra Regional Group meeting, which is municipalities down the south coast and across the Monero and over to Yass. And of course we are an associate member because we're on the border with Bega Valley. Of course, with most of those shires being impacted by the bushfires, that was a discussion in Parliament House about that and recovery. And a little bit, as Councillor Peltz has just indicated, the key trends out of that were the loss of communications in the remote areas, extremely important because of, as we know, during our fires, the number of people who were isolated, and we for some time did not even have contact with them. The roads issue, Bega Valley feel that something that we'd been really worried about with the Princes Highway being closed for so long, they felt that it impacted them even more than us. So you don't realise how much transport comes down the coast. We sort of think of taking stuff away from our region and going north, but they were being particularly badly impacted by that. And the other thing, hopefully they listened in Canberra, is the rolling out of the funds. It hasn't been working quite as smoothly as they would hope, and we just hope that they listen to some of our concerns regarding that. So thank you. Right, that concludes our council reports. Our next item is that we have a speaker in Mr. Peter Ingle. So, Peter, would you like to step forward? And just please remember to turn your microphone on, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, councillors. My name's Peter Ingle and I'm the Representative Director of Merringbao Heights Proprietary Limited, which is the subdivider involved in the planning permit matter before discussion. A little bit of history. Those of you who are relatively new may not know, but this entity has been in existence since 1987, when the then Tambo Shire agreed to an overall plan of subdivision of the subject land. And that was the whole of the property that was part of the late Mr. Lawson's property. Now, it was done and developed in stages. And when we got to about the 9th stage, it was determined that there should be, instead of having to come back to council every time you wanted to do a new stage, it was more important to have an overall plan, to have the whole area available for subdivision without having to come back to council to get new permits every time you wanted to do another stage. The actual application, as you'll know from reading your agenda in relation to this matter, was done in 2011. Now, my basic mathematics says that's 9 years ago. And I'm hopeful, and I think thankful, that at last we may be at the last stage. 3 years ago at this particular meeting, I think it was the February or the March meeting in 2017, a strategic plan, development plan, was approved by council. 3 years later, we're back here now after having finally arrived at what we'll all say is an agreed set of conditions subject that's making the subdivision plan that it had to comply with. Now, that's a little bit of the history. It has taken a long time. I think your senior planning officers have been, on the whole, generally available when we need to discuss issues, including, in particular, Mr. Aaron Hollow and Mrs. Nicole Reynolds. We've had our ups and downs, we've had our differences, but I think we're now at a stage where, like it or not, whether we like it or not, we've at least got to a finalisation. The important thing, I think, though, for council is that Lakes Entrance has the potential to become a major tourist retirement and development area. We were looking a while ago at whether there's anywhere around lakes for a industrial subdivision, but topography and the area itself does not lend itself to that. Unfortunately, the closest development areas are in Bairnsdale, and there are plenty of them available. But with that aside, the support for the development of the area for residential and development is, I believe, growing and will grow as the highway improves. It's now 4-lane highway all the way to Sale. We're now going to have, when the Stratford Bridge is completed, 5 rail services a day to Bairnsdale and consequential linkages to Lakes Entrance by bus services. So there is the big potential for this area to be developed as a residential development site for recreation facilities, for retirement facilities and holiday facilities, as well as, of course, the continuation support for the fishing industry. We see it that with this piece of land is the largest available site available for, and having reached this stage 3 years after the development plan, for people to be able to access at a reasonable cost a residential site, whether it be for a holiday, whether it be for their own permanent residence or whatever, it's going to be there available for them. You will also have noted in looking at the plans in relation to the subdivision, a large area has been set aside basically or towards the middle of the development, whereby a retirement village is available to be created. So having said all of that, on behalf of the developer, I would ask that council favourably look upon this permit and give it the tick that has been waiting for a long, long time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Ingles. So this is in relation to item 5.1.1, which is planning permit application 177/2011/P/A. Application for a 166 lot subdivision, roadworks, removal of native vegetation, removal of an existing power line easement at 54 Thorpes Lane, Lakes Entrance, called Marangaba Heights Residential Estate. So, Mr. Hollows, would you like to come forward and talk on behalf of council? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I won't go over some of the background there, but it was very useful. You know that it's gone through, this site's gone through a lot of strategic planning, including the development of a development plan over the site, and the permit application is the last stage before the development can be realised. Council, this is 166 lot subdivision. It's a logical and practical subdivision of this land. It joins in with the rest of the land that was developed from the 1980s onwards, and it provides good eastern and western connections for the future, both in terms of passive recreation and traffic. Councillors, I would like to bring to your attention that with the new bushfire policy, the CFA provided with a letter outlining that it had some matters that it would like to see included in this application, and councillors, we've reacted favourably with those and with the applicants by making sure that we got landscape plans placed into one of the gullies to make sure that it wasn't going to be causing an undue fire issue. We've made sure that we've got a landscape plan that will still achieve nutrient stripping. Councillors, we've been able to control the western side of the subdivision through legal agreements and through staging of the development. councillors, we also had, as part of the development plan, an independent engineer have a look at the road connections through the site, and it determined that the site could act independently, but of course would like to see into the future that the development leads through to the western side of an undeveloped parcel of land, and that's what it does, and that's all predicated on the northern Lakes Entrance Northern Growth Area planning scheme amendment that was the forerunner for this proposal. Councillors, I know you've had a good chance to have a look at this report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr Hollows. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Ellis.
I have no questions, Mr Mayor, if anyone, but I'm happy to foreshadow moving the recommendation.
Before we do that, is there anyone with any questions? Oh, thank you. All right, so this recommendation is moved by Councillor Ellis and seconded by Councillor Peltz. Would you like to speak, Councillor Ellis?
Just very briefly, I pick up on Mr Hollow's words of this application being logical and practical in its nature. It's a long-standing 30 plus year development that has encountered many of the obstacles of the modern planning environment, and the developers have met all the demands placed upon them. So therefore I recommend that the recommendation before council be adopted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Peltz, you wish to speak?
I'm just happy to be seconding this motion and putting it to bed after all these years, and I wish the applicant all the success in developing it. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Rotino.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to also support the mover and seconder. I see in our report it's 6 to 9 years in the making, as some of the comments, but as you can see from Mr Engel's words here tonight, this project's been going on for many decades, and an overlay was a great step forward in many ways in bringing all the decision agencies onto to one platform and creating the Lakes Entrance Northern Growth Area. And I believe this 166 lot subdivision will enhance and enable development, and has in certain areas on some of the best views of Bass Strait that I've ever seen, and I wish them all the best with their future development. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rotino. So, councillors, we'll put this to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. It's passed unanimously.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
And thank you, officers, for getting finalised.
Okay, that brings us to 5.2.1, which is leasing and licensing policy for council-owned land and council-managed land. Welcome, Mr Field.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So the purpose of this paper to council is to seek council's adoption of the updated leasing and licensing policy, which was last approved in February 2017. By way of background, council is responsible for both managing land that it both owns and that is owned by the Victorian Government as Crown Land, or manages Crown Land. This policy ensures that the leasing and licensing of land under its auspices is subject to a fair and transparent process. The key points I'd like to raise for council associated with the amended policy is: one, is a change in the naming convention of the policy to leasing and licensing, which better reflects the rights and responsibilities of tenants accessing council-owned and managed land. It seeks to provide greater clarity around the commercial and community objectives under the policy. Three, in line with the recommendation from the Crow internal audit that was finalised in September 2019, proposes the introduction of a capital improved valuation methodology for rental assessments for non-profit organisations who undertake commercial activities. A new provision has been added, which is consistent with DELP's policy for longer term leases for large scale projects of regional significance, and those leases are being proposed for 21 years. And probably the final two things I would like to raise with council: we've sought in the policy strengthen the definition of what is meant by commercial use. And finally, we've tried to increase the threshold for public liability insurance to $20 million and have raised and put onus and obligation on tenants around emergency and evacuation plans.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Peltz.
I'd just like to publicly have it pointed out, but I was curious, Mr Conazaro, if you would give me the liberty of stating whether the lease agreements will be as of now, the new lease agreements, if these are adopted tonight, or whether it will follow through to the current lease agreements fruition. So if, for example, if you currently have a lease agreement that is a 3x3x3, a 9-year period, will the old lease agreements be honoured, or will the new lease agreements kick in after the first 3 years after this is implemented? If you could just expand on the complexity of that, please, for us.
Thank you, Councillor Pals. In short, they will kick in at the expiration of the term of the agreement. Yes.
With that stated, if anyone has any more questions, I'll be happy to move this.
Councillor Rotino.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question just relates into, there's been some discussion around 21 years is currently the maximum term. If that changed in the future, does that mean all the agreements would have to be renegotiated if they were changed to, say, 49 years?
Councillor Rotino, there'd be two options there. You'd either honour the contractual term of the lease being 21 years, or by probably mutual agreement between council and the other party, the commercial party, could seek to vary the term of the agreement.
You certainly may, Councillor Ellis.
It's directed Mr Cannizzaro, and it's just kept following on from Councillor Peltz's question, and I just want to clarify, because I may have misunderstood the answer, and that was that this new policy does not affect existing leases and will only come into place once the leases are completed, the current terms of the leases are completed. Is that correct?
Once they've expired, yes.
So someone on a 21-year lease selling alcohol or running a very public and active sport such as drag racing or something will not be negatively impacted by the introduction of these matters in this policy?
The lease will run to the end of the term, and then this leasing licensing policy will come into effect.
Thank you, officers and councillors. Now, we actually have Councillor Peltz has moved this. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Toohey. Councillor Peltz, would you like to speak?
I'm just happy to move this evening, and I do think that some of the community might be a bit shocked by it, but the bottom line is we've been operating outside of the agreements, you could almost say, in regards to our Committee of Management role, and I think by recognising the DELP and the Crown Land format, we are basically moving this council into line with what is expected of our role as managers of Crown Land. So I think what the officers have done, they've tried to simplify what DELP have actually put in place and make it a bit more easier to understand, but it does give format into the future about lease agreements for our community and the enterprises that are making use of the public facilities. So with that, I'm happy to move the recommendation for some continuity. Thank you.
Councillor Toohey, would you like to speak? Any other speakers for or against? All right, I think we could put that. Was that a wave of the hand, or Councillor Ellis, or just get on with the job?
No, unfortunately I was unable to attend the briefing last week to get an understanding of this particular matter, but I see matters here that councillors may find in the longer term may negatively affect community clubs or preclude them from being able to afford to rent properties. Now, I may be wrong because I wasn't at that briefing last week, but that said, having read the notes very briefly and just scanning back over the policy, there are some issues there that I feel uncomfortable with, so I'm speaking against the adoption of the policy.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Pelch, you would have a right of reply.
When I first read this paper, I felt not unsimilar to Councillor Ellis, but I did take the time to ask questions over the period that I wasn't in attendance last week, and I have been satisfied with the answers from our CEO and our governance officers, and I felt that, yes, it is actually something that needs to be done. It's probably a long time overdue, and I think we, as a council, are operating outside of the role that we should be, so I felt that it was actually worth supporting, and I thank the officers for their work in this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, so we'll put this to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? So we have Councillor Ellis against, all other councillors for. Thank you. So now we have item 5.2.2, which is public interest disclosure policy. So if we could have a report on that, please.
I'll get there. Thank you. This policy is, the purpose of this paper is to update council's policies around public disclosures so they're consistent with recent changes to legislation. I think some of the key points again that I'd raise for council's benefit is there's been a change in the naming convention of the policy due to a legislation change for it to become the protected disclosure of the public interest disclosure and public interest complaint policy. There's a definition of improper conduct has been broadened to include serious professional misconduct, which is not necessarily corrupt behaviour, but is seen as willful or systemic failure to perform duties expected in a role. The policy also seeks to expand the number of bodies where investigations or complaints can be made, and so it now includes the Chief Municipal Officer, the Information Commissioner and the Racing Integrity Commissioner. There's also in the policy a requirement to have a risk management plan, which needs to also consider the welfare both of those who are being investigated as well as those who are actually involved quite innocently in terms of a third-party investigation. That's really all I needed to say on that matter, and I'm happy to take questions.
Councillors? Pardon? Well, any questions? Anybody? Okay. All right, so we have that is moved by Councillor Reeves and seconded by Councillor Rotino. So, Councillor Reeves, you wish to speak?
Look, very briefly, I think the policy statement reflects exactly how I feel and my beliefs and values around these matters. That East Gippsland Shire's Council is committed to ensuring transparency and accountability throughout the organisation and in compliance with the Act. I think that summarises it beautifully.
Thank you. Councillor Rotino? All right, well, so we have a mover and a seconder, and I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is a unanimous decision. Thank you, councillors. And next, we have item 5.2.3, which is waiving of development fees associated with directly impacted bushfire-affected properties. So we have Mr. Hollows in attendance. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, everyone's aware of the bushfire event of this summer, and it's resulted in direct impacts to many private properties. There'll be many landholders considering temporary accommodation buildings on these properties, and they may consider replacement. Generally, planning applications and other development fees are associated with the building of structures, dwellings and the like. Councillors, I take you to the recommendation, and that's the council approves the waiving of development fees associated with temporary buildings and permanent rebuilding of structures for landholders that have been directly impacted by bushfire event of 1920. Councillors, I'd like to take you to the financial element of this report. And yes, there will be some income that will not be realised as a result of this recommendation, but it's income that wasn't budgeted for, and therefore it won't affect council's bottom line. Councillors, yes, there will be some additional work that will need to be undertaken by obviously planning officers, building officers, engineers and our health officers. And we're looking at ways in which we can put on additional officers to assist with that work to facilitate the development of these properties. And we're looking to see what options there might be to negate these costs. Councillors, happy to take questions.
Thank you, Aaron. And this is extremely important, and it's just one of the many steps we can take in order to help these people who have been dramatically affected by the bushfires. So this is just one step in the right direction. Now we've had that moved by Councillor Rotino, seconded by Councillor Toohey. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Rotino?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just briefly, thanks, Aaron, for the report. This motion's financially responsible. It's a decision. More importantly, that is the right decision. Our recovery efforts, our processes must be focused on our people and our communities that we're trying to help. Thank you, Aaron.
Councillor Toohey? No. Anyone else wish to speak? Yes,
I'll just
Councillor
add,
Reeves.
Mayor, to Councillor Rotino's comments, that it's also socially responsible, and that's an important bottom line. A healthy social community is one that's going to flourish economically.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. And Councillor Peltz.
Yes, I'm happy to support this motion. I think it's the least we can do considering what our community has been through. It's been a horrific time, and I believe that I think the officer's initiative to follow up with this is great, and I know that the building process will probably take time, and I think it's something that people out there would actually prefer it to happen more quickly, but I thank the officers for coming up with this because it's actually what we really need to happen for our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. Councillors, we'll put this to the vote. All those in favour? Also unanimous. Thank you. Item 5.3.1, which is a road exchange, Old Coach Road, Tambo Crossing. And welcome back, Mr Friel. You could brief us on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So the purpose of this paper is to seek council approval to commence proceedings for a road discontinuance, which will then allow for a road exchange to occur between council and the property owner at 94 Old Coach Road at Tambo Crossing. In summary, Old Coach Road traverses the property towards the north. The owner wants to build a hay shed on the northern section of the property, which is indicated in yellow on attachment 2. Back to Councillor Reynolds' question previously, a planning permit was declined as originally the proposed site was on a road reserve. The proposed area now is the only flat area on the property for the hay shed to be built. The southern section of the property is currently used by members of the public to access the Tambo River, and the owners proposed the road exchange area to the north for the hay shed with the area of the property in the south that Old Coach Road traverses through. Probably the only other thing is that the area to be exchanged is exactly the same in area. Happy to take questions.
Councillor Buckley.
This is not going to impose any restrictions on the road that's already
No, so
exists.
the hay shed, Councillor Buckley, is in that.
It's just on the easement of the old road.
In the road reserve, that's correct.
And the new easement will go around.
That's correct.
No disadvantage to anybody.
No,
Not an advantage to the landowner.
No, that's advantage to him. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, well, I will. If you're ready for it.
Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Ellis, we can't rush this. We need to see if anyone else wants to ask a question. Councillor Reeves, thank you.
Is it absolute coincidence that the land area of exchange is identical? Or a happy coincidence?
I've been told, Councillor Reeves, that I must keep my answers short, so I would say that I think it's just been well managed that it is the same area. And I don't believe in coincidences.
Good answer. Now, Councillor Buckley, I believe you wish to move this.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I so move that we accept the recommendation here for the road exchange, 94 Old Country Road, Tambo Crossing, and so forth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have a seconder in Councillor Ellis? So, would you like to speak to this recommendation?
I already have, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
That's it? Good. Anyone else wish to speak to this? No? All right, we have the recommendation. So, all those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Now, this moves us to urgent and other business. Mr CEO?
Through you, Mr Mayor, no councillor has indicated that they have any urgent or other business items.
Thank you. So now we need a councillor, please, to move us into camera for discussion of contractual agreements. So, Councillor Peltz.
I so move that that council now close the meeting to the public in accordance with the provision of section 89 brackets 2 insert section of the Local Government Act 1989 to consider items 7.1 to 7.9 as these items relate to contractual matters.
Thank you. So, seconder is Councillor Ellis. Now, we put this to the vote. All those in favour? It's unanimous that we go into camera. Thank you, councillors. I'll just pause for a moment.